Hi, I'm Kevin Liston.
And I'm Joshua Crocker.
And this is Kicking for a Living,
a podcast about martial arts and business from two martial arts instructors.
Well, I'm excited. I know you're excited because we've been talking about doing this for a while. A kind of FAQ or Q&A, I guess, about martial arts. I know this is something we talked about very early on in our first podcast, which seems like a long time ago. So I'm really excited that we finally get to do this.
We reached out to some of our students to leave us their questions, and they had some good ones for us. So we have a handful of questions. We'll try to get to them all today. We'll see how many we have time for. But yeah, this will be our last episode of Season 2. So we decided to go out with some good questions from you all, and then hopefully be back for some more episodes in the future. But I'm excited for some of these questions.
Yeah, I think it's really neat that not only were these questions from, just people online, some of these people we've trained with and things like that, but also some of our direct students. So some of these questions may be very geared towards us specifically, but we'll try to kind of relate those to martial arts in general as well for listeners who may not be familiar with us, our school, or things like that, kind of give a little bit of a reference. So.
But no, there's a good variety of questions here. Right off the bat, I'm just going to kind of go through two that are going to be a little trickier to answer on the podcast, because they're more based on how to do a technique. But we can maybe kind of give our best answer here.
Yeah, and just maybe touch on what that technique is or why it might be used, things of that nature. But also, we could show these specific students in the class. That's why they asked. So
yes,
I'm more than happy to do that.
So the first question I have here is how to do a butterfly kick. A butterfly kick is one of the fancier advanced kicks. Not necessarily the most practical for self-defense, but it's fun. And it's great for learning how to use your momentum and carry yourself around.
Essentially, a butterfly kick, for those who may not know, is a spinning style kick. You use the momentum of one leg and you swing the other one around, either in a crescent or a round kick style. Now, I personally am terrible at the round kick version.
The round kick version is a lot harder. I prefer the crescent kick one.
Yeah, I can do the crescent kick one pretty well, make it look pretty good. The round kick one, not so much. But I know, Dan prefers the round kick, so it just kind of depends on
the round kick one is good if you're, striking a bag and you actually want to hit. So I'll give, though, a brief kind of overview of it. And again, you can replace the crescent kick in these with a round kick, but I'll describe it as a crescent kick. So you'll take your kicking leg and you're going to do an outside to in crescent kick. Use that momentum to carry yourself around for pretty much a 360 turn. As you're coming back around to the original way you were facing, you're going to take your non-kicking leg, swing that knee up and jump, and then as you sit that leg down, you're going to take your original kicking leg and do another crescent kick in the same direction. So you end up doing two crescent kicks with the same leg, with a jump on the other leg in between as you spin around. I might see if we can post a video in the description of this video. Maybe we'll even film one real quick after this. But it's a pretty... I was about to say it's a pretty simple kick, but it's not. It's pretty complex. But if you know how to just carry your body momentum through the kick, it's not as hard. It's when you're practicing, you want to do faster than slower. Because the slower you do it, the harder it is to keep the momentum going you need.
Yeah, I was actually looking up to see, because there's a lot of variations of the butterfly kick, but I was kind of seeing why it's called a butterfly kick. When you do it, I guess, you're kind of in the air, so maybe that's why it's called a butterfly, but you're not doing like a butterfly motion or anything like that, like you would like a stretch. So, but it's a fun little kick to do. It's definitely good for athleticism.
Yes. And again, just because a kick isn't the most practical for self-defense doesn't mean there's not a reason to do it.
Oh, sure.
Next question. Here's a quick one. How do you hit with the palm or the fist? And why would you choose one over the other?
So I think I like this question because a lot of times at the end of the day, so a palm heel, obviously you're hitting with the palm, and a fist you're hitting with your fist or your knuckles. And there are many times when you would prefer a palm heel over a fist. And if we're talking, in my opinion, pure self-defense, you're probably going to want to do a palm heel more often than not. If you don't know how to punch right, you're going to end up hurting or breaking your hand because there's a lot of bones in there. And so when you see like board breaking, you'll see a lot more palm heels simply because it's safer. And you're hitting more with the squishy or meaty part of the hand.
A lot of beginner students, if they're hitting a heavy bag or a board, that's why, tell them to hit with the palm because they don't usually have gloves yet when they just started. And you don't want to do those kinds of hits without gloves on to protect your knuckles or years of conditioning. And we've been teaching classes lately talking about striking the back of the head. The back of the head's pretty hard. You got the skull back there. So if you hit someone in the back of the head with your hand, you're possibly going to injure yourself if you don't know how to punch correct.
Yeah.
Which is why I told students when going to the back of the head in self-defense, it might be better to hit with the palm instead of the fist.
Yeah, and a lot of times you see a lot of boxing, MMA, and things, they're wearing gloves. Well, that is not only to protect their partner, but it's to protect their own hand. That way they don't bust up their own fingers and knuckles. But and a palm heel.
We talk about that on the ground too.
Yeah.
If you're striking someone on the ground for whatever reason, and you miss, and you have a fist, and you hit the concrete or whatever hard surface is below them, that's going to hurt you 100%, them 0%.
Right. But a palm heel does still take practice.
Yeah.
I mean, I would argue as much as a fist takes practice to hit properly, so you don't hit your fingers.
The cool thing about a palm heel and just a cross punch is they're pretty much the same from the body mechanics. There's not a lot of difference between how you move your body. It's just your hand position is the big difference.
Right. So why would you choose one over the other? Protect your hand. That's why you would choose a palm heel over a fist.
To finally wrap that up, the reason you choose a fist over a palm heel is it is stronger. Like there is, if you know how to do a punch better, then it's going to be a stronger hit.
Just a fist to do more length on your punch as well. So.
And a more concentrated
area,
yeah. All right, next question. We've touched on this one before, but it's always a cool one to talk about. So how long have we been open here at Integrity, and why did we move buildings?
Now, if you'll remember earlier episodes, we actually talked about how we moved to a bigger location and things like that.
We started Season 2 with our moving episode, so if you want to hear more about that, I'd go check out that episode. We talk about what that process was like and why we moved buildings.
But we are coming up on 10 years. It hasn't quite been 10, but we're coming up on our 10 years of Integrity Martial Arts specifically. That's not how long we've been doing martial arts, but that's how long this school has been open.
I know I just passed my black belt anniversary, and I'm about to reach my training anniversary. I started training about 14 years ago this October. And then, in upcoming March, we'll be celebrating our 10-year anniversary.
So, we've been doing that. Why did we move? Simple answer, we outgrew the space we were in. We were busting at the seams. Our mats were really full, so we needed a bigger place. And that's a good problem to have.
A question I get asked a lot, and this will get into something we're going to talk about a little bit more with some of the upcoming questions, but is why only in Little Ninjas can you get a white-red stripe? So I'm going to give some context to this question. In our Little Ninja program, so our 4 through 6-year-old class, we do striped belts. So it's a white belt, and then each level has a color stripe down the middle that more or less corresponds with our core program. So the first Little Ninja belt you get after white is a white belt with a yellow stripe down the middle. This is pretty common in a lot of schools, I think, nowadays, for little kids to get these striped belts until they move into the main program. So the reason why you only see the white with striped belts is because they're for the younger kids who aren't quite ready, old enough to learn the main material yet. Mm-hmm. But then, off the question of why is there only the color red in Little Ninjas and not core, there's a little bit more to that.
Yeah, that is one of those. So this question is actually going to come up a little later on. But so we have trained in multiple styles. And the two primary styles that we kind of mimicked the belts were karate, Ishinryu specifically, and Taekwondo. Karate and several other styles, the red belt is actually after the black belt. But in Taekwondo, the red belt comes before, almost right before, a black belt. And since we've trained and our instructors have come from multiple styles, when we were designing our belts, originally there was a red belt in there. But as we started implementing more karate, we moved in the core program the red belt out, basically as a sign of respect. I didn't want to disrespect one style over the other, so we decided to move that red belt out, save some confusion. That way there wasn't people like, well, I thought the red was after black, but the red's before blah, blah, blah. For the 4, 5, and 6-year-old, we just kept it the same. Mostly because in the core program, we have a purple and then an advanced purple and then a brown belt and an advanced brown belt, which we call candidate. Well, with Little Ninjas, we can't do multicolored belts with a stripe, so we kept the red in. It's cool. They're 4, 5, and 6. They get a cool little red belt. It's something unique to them. But mostly it's the difference in the styles.
And I don't think a lot of our students actually know this, but we sort of did bring back the red belt kind of by accident. Because a couple years ago, Miss Deb and I were working on building the rank system for her kickboxing class. Mm-hmm. And at the time, it was just kind of a side class. And it wasn't really built into our main program yet. But we put in a red belt in that because we just wanted to do a bunch of unique belt colors. And that was our main goal. Is we were like, this is just a fun side class. At the time it was Deb's women's only class. She's since, as she talked about, expanded it. But the ranks were like white, orange, but then we got into like a bright green, a dark blue, red. There's like a half black, half pink belt. So there's a lot of fun colors in that one. And we did bring back the red belt there. So I wonder if we'll keep that. We've yet to have a student actually reach that level yet.
Yeah, that's a fairly new program. And it's a unique program as well. And we wanted to give unique belts out. And belts are interesting because at the end of the day, it's really just a milestone to kind of show some progress. And yes, there is a lot of tie to skill level in that. But so many styles, use so many different belts, so many different kinds of belts. I mean, there are camo belts out there in some schools.
Like camouflage.
A camouflage belt. Whether you agree or disagree with that, but there are so many different colored belts. So a lot of the reason we removed the red belt from the core was just as a show of respect. We want to honor and respect some of those traditions. But we kept it with the Little Ninjas. So they would get that extra belt in there. 4, 5, and 6-year-olds, they appreciate having the different colors. And most of the time, they don't even make it to that belt. They usually age out of that program and move into our bigger kids before them. But we've had a few that have gotten there. We've had some. I'm more surprised that our students even notice that.
Yeah, it's one that get asked every once in a while by usually those kids who like always have some question for you. And sometimes having ridiculous questions asked all the time. I don't think this is a ridiculous question, but no. These kids sometimes ask ridiculous questions. It can wear on you, but usually the kids who ask a lot of questions are engaged and want to know more. So even if their questions are a little silly at times, I appreciate that they're wanting to learn and they want to know more about what we do here and about martial arts.
Right. I'm glad that they're, especially for that age, they're paying attention and being like, wait a second, why does this one have this color and this one doesn't? So good on them for their awareness, especially at that age.
And yeah, I think the last thing, as you kind of mentioned with belts, is if you hear someone and they tell you, like, I'm this level belt, there's no way of knowing exactly what that means because each school has a different pacing, different rank system. Just because one person tells you, I got my green belt, can mean something completely different for them than it might be for you. So if you hear someone has like this belt, it's really impossible to know without actually seeing them do martial arts to know what skill they actually have.
Yeah, right. And it's also style dependent, which we'll come back to yet again.
Let's go and get into that, actually. Styles of martial arts. So here, this is a big question. I did some research on this one. How many types of martial arts are there, and why don't we do more? So I'm going to go and get into some of my notes real quick, and then you can add on.
Sure.
So the first thing we have to say is there's no way of really knowing how many types of martial arts there are. There's not really an exact count. But I did some research, like I said, I looked it up, and I came out to about 170 to 180 active styles of martial arts seem to be the consensus online. And I kind of counted up, but even then the list I looked at had some inconsistencies in it because they had some styles like karate, which, you know, all as one category. They didn't list the different subsections of karate like Gojinryu, Ishinryu, Shotokan, and more. So, like, it's possible there's even more styles there. There's always, like, ancient styles that are out of practice now. So there's definitely some room for debate there. As well as I was doing the research in styles, it kept coming up the difference between unarmed martial arts and armed martial arts. Mm-hmm. So for most of what I'm about to say is just unarmed styles. I'm not really an expert in weapons in martial arts. I would love to bring on one of our weapons instructors to talk all about that. But for the most part, I'm going to be sticking to just unarmed combat.
Well, and I think that's really what they were looking for, I think, when they asked that question. But there's a lot of martial arts, which is also, to answer the second part, why we don't do more, is because we can't do them all. You can't learn all of them. There's just too many.
So I was thinking about it, and I'm trying to remember. I think I came out to that I've done some level of training in about 7 different styles of martial arts, as well as like another 1 or 2 I know a single strike from, or single move. And in most cases, like we call it, like for Aikido, for example, I know 1 throw from Aikido, and we call it the Aikido throw. Or like the Capoeira kick. I don't know any Capoeira, but I know this one spinny kick that we call the Capoeira kick.
Yeah, it's a lot of times I have to think of martial arts that I've done versus martial arts that I have some kind of rank in, because that's vastly different. I've done seminars, and we've had guest instructors that have shown different styles or something from a different style. And a lot of martial arts do pull from other styles, ours included. We pull from a lot of different styles. And so you'll do a little bit from some different stuff, but...
And that's one thing I wanted to point out is, especially now, there's like very few schools that do just one style. And even if they claim to just do one style, it may be influenced by other types of martial arts as well. So really, I mean, you can make the argument that there's many different styles as there are teachers or dojos. Like each school is going to be unique in that regard because they have different instructors with different backgrounds, with different ways of teaching their students. So, you know, you could say each one, you could claim here at Integrity, we have our core program, which is a mix of different styles that, you know, you could claim that is its own style in a way. And for any other school that does a sort of integrated or mixed martial arts, you could claim they have their own style. I think a lot people don't like to come up with new styles like that because it's usually not looked upon very highly. If you're like, oh, I came up with my own style of martial arts, that's not a way to get your name very popular in the martial arts community.
Yeah, that doesn't make you look cool.
Yeah. But I think that's what most schools nowadays, to some extent, do. We just call it a curriculum. Just like a school that teaches math, they have their math curriculum.
Well, and I think that so on the different styles of martial arts, you know, even Jiu-Jitsu schools will usually have some kind of striking class that they offer every now and then. Not all of them, but I've seen a lot of them do that. Why? Because they understand the importance of mixing that in. That doesn't mean that they're creating their own style. It's still a Jiu-Jitsu school. But they will add in some striking. And a lot of like Judo and Jiu-Jitsu schools mix a lot of times. I mean, at this point, karate and Taekwondo usually mix unless it's an older school that's been around for a long time.
There's, again, like 180 styles. there's also only so many different ways to, punch someone, to do the techniques. There's a
Right.
lot of redundancy between these styles and similarities. For a lot of them, it just comes down to like difference between rink and kata, a lot of the traditional stuff. But as you see, like the actual techniques, you can divide a lot of these styles into 3 main categories: striking styles, grappling styles, and mixed styles. So, like, a great example of a striking style would be karate. A great example of a grappling style would be Jiu-Jitsu, Judo. And then a mixed style would be something like MMA or Jeet Kune Do.
And even Jeet Kune Do is more of a philosophy of fighting than a style.
And that's
it
another,
kind of has developed into a style.
And that's another thing, is I was because I've always claimed that, and you've always said that about Jeet Kune Do. But as I was looking through these lists, that's another area where it was kind of muddy on, are these actually styles or philosophies? And I decided to include it in some of my notes, Jeet Kune Do that is, because while it doesn't have any rink or kata, it's still, I think a lot of people train in it, and it's sort of like you said, become a style, almost an offshoot or similarity to MMA, but with more of a self-defense approach over competition approach.
Right. Which it's almost interesting that MMA has become its own style, when at the end of the day it's a mix of martial arts.
Yeah,
That's all it is.
And MMA was a hard one because I have a list of 21 major styles I'm going to get to in a second. And I included MMA on the list after some debate because the whole point of it is a mix. Just like we said with ours, like we do a mix. I just think MMA kind of became a more accepted style of its...
Right.
I'm just kind of mumbling over my words now, but it kind of became its own thing due to the popularity of, things like the UFC and other fighting competitions.
Well, and I think anytime there's a competition and there's specific things, there are techniques that tend to work more than others, and so MMA basically became, well, here's the things that work and have worked over time. Not that there's not other things, but that's kind of what they start focusing on. But let's get through this this list here.
So I found about 21 styles that I think seem to be somewhat unique and kind of umbrella styles. There's some similarities still. So I'll list them all real quick. You can count how many you know. Kickboxing, Taekwondo, Karate, Kung Fu, Muay Thai, Judo, Aikido, Jiu-Jitsu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Tai Chi, Krav Maga, Capoeira, Boxing, Wing Chun, Savate, Jeet Kune Do, Hapkido, Sumo, Wrestling, Filipino martial arts styles, and then mixed martial arts. So those were about the 21. Let me know if I forgot any, because, again, there is so many. But I think those are kind of the main 21 that I could find that I've at least heard or know somewhat about and still seem to be popular today.
And even on that, just clarification, we understand that there are several versions of Taekwondo. Mm-hmm. Whether you're doing the ITF or the Taekwondo Federation katas or pongseis or
That's why I say, these are kind of like the umbrella styles.
Same thing with karate.
Like I even debated including Jiu-Jitsu and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu separately, but everywhere I kept looking, people listed them as separate styles, so I decided there's enough of a difference between those to include them separately. I feel like Jiu-Jitsu and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the difference between those is kind of like the difference between karate and Taekwondo.
A little bit, yeah. So, and why don't we do more? We can't learn all of them. I would love to, but my brain can only hold so much.
Well, that's why we have all the different teachers, and we talked about, why we do the ones we do is because of the instructors we have and their different backgrounds. I don't have a black belt in kickboxing, but Miss Deb, she does. So she's a great kickboxing teacher for the rest of us. I am not a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, but you are, so you have that experience.
Which actually, Deb, her rank is technically in Taekwondo, but their school she was at just did so much kickboxing and boxing that you naturally pick up on it.
There's 2 questions now going off of styles that relate to this. I'm going to jump in on one real quick because we've already kind of talked about it. But from one of our black belts of our judo program asked, how do you think the introduction of more grappling classes and lessons like judo has impacted the club?
Oh man, I absolutely love it. I think it has been a very positive, because before we had our primary styles were kind of Taekwondo, Karate, Jiu-Jitsu. We've implemented some more, as you said, kickboxing and boxing. And I think judo has really helped bridge the gap between standing, striking. Now I've got a hold of them. How do I get them to the ground so I can use my jiu-jitsu? And I also think that it's really impacted the club in a positive way, because I've said this to my jiu-jitsu class. Most of the takedowns done in jiu-jitsu come directly from wrestling or judo. Mm-hmm. Maybe slight variants. I would say pull guard is really the only one unique to jiu-jitsu. And so it's only made those even better, because now you have the people that specifically do that. And honestly, I've seen the judo program grow. Like, it is something that our students are legitimately very interested in.
It may be getting to the point where it's one of our biggest path classes.
I really like what judo has helped in give students a little more confidence in their ability to do these takedowns and things, because that's always tricky. And before, without that specific training, it kind of just boiled down to grab and then out muscle them to the ground.
And I train in the judo class. I've always was known for being a kicker in sparring, but since starting judo especially, I've noticed I became a mix of like a kicker and someone who likes to get in and throw people. So like I've noticed like those are now my two strengths, or at least the two things I want to do the most in a sparring match. So I've even seen it gives me more variety and versatility in my fighting.
Which I think is, for those of you who kind of understand martial arts, that's pretty rare to have someone that goes from a kicking range further distance to shooting in. That's probably catches people off guard too.
And if I have anything, one of the things I have trouble here at the school because of all the styles we do and all the great instructors that I've learned from is finding like my thing that I'm really good at. It's like you're kind of known as the Jiu-Jitsu guy at our dojo. You're our highest ranked Jiu-Jitsu student as a purple belt. Deb's the kickboxing person. Dan's the karate guy. Bonnie's the judo instructor. I don't really have any of those titles, but I think my ability to take my sparring from kicking into close, like I've yet to see anyone else here quite be able to do it like I can. And I've tried to teach it, and I've realized just how natural that came to me once I tried to teach it, because it's so hard to get other people to do the same thing. And I'm like, well, it's easy for me, but I kind of figured it out over time. So that's kind of where I found one of my niches is just between the styles and how to connect them.
Right, which I think judo is a great one. And honestly, you say you don't have, but I think what you just described is what your unique fighting is. We came from more set ways of doing things, whereas you've always had that versatility, which allows you to kind of jump into any class, any pot, and always do well. Mm-hmm. That was part of the reason I started training multiple martial arts. Was I was doing Taekwondo, I would, side topic here, I'd go in, I'd do a seminar in grappling, and I'd feel completely lost. And it wasn't until I was only a blue belt and I was at an MMA seminar and I was working with a black belt in karate who looked like a white belt. And they were very humble. I say that just because it was new to them. But because I had done a little bit of like grappling and stuff like that, they were so appreciative of the help I was giving. They were like, man, that was so different. And that's when I was like, okay, this is why I do multiple things. So I can fit into any mold and pot well enough. Not like an expert, but well enough. I'm not going to be just completely caught off guard.
Yeah.
And I think judo helps with that.
And even if, like, again, we brought up the main different styles sort into striking, grappling, and mixed. If you can get like a mixed or both striking and grappling training, I think that's a good place to start. You don't need to do like 7, 10, 20 different styles. But if you can get like one in at least some of the major different distances and ranges, I think that's good.
Actually, I think you just described MMA in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Rather than do like 7 of them,
I think that's
Here
why
you
you've
go.
seen MMA grow in popularity, and that's why I say either do a mixed style like that, or like one striking and one grappling style,
Right.
at least. We'll quickly talk about this one because it's related. What is the big difference between wrestling and BJJ? Why do people compare the two so much?
So I'll jump in on this one. So the main difference between wrestling and BJJ is how you win. At the end of the day, a lot of wrestlers will go against Jiu-Jitsu guys. Jiu-Jitsu guys will go against wrestlers. And while they have unique ways of doing it, they're both grappling arts. They're both primarily focused on the ground. It's what constitutes as a win. So in wrestling, the objective is to pin them on their back. You want to pin their shoulders on the ground. That's the goal to win in wrestling. In Jiu-Jitsu, winning, yes, there's points, but we're going to say is submission. Catching them in a choke, an arm bar, a shoulder lock, da-da-da-da-da. Making the other person tap and say, okay, you're going to damage me or else I'm going to tap. And that's really the main difference. When you get someone that does both, they can get really, really good. And it almost, you'll have someone that says, I've never done jiu-jitsu. Oh, great. So they're new. But then you realize they've done 5 years of wrestling. No, they're going to give you a hard time. They're going to be really good on the ground. So the main difference is honestly the rule set and how you win.
I was going to say, if you take equally skilled wrestler versus jiu-jitsu, the winner would be whatever rule set you're following.
Yes, correct. If you take someone who's really good at jiu-jitsu and really good at wrestling, but put them in a rule set of wrestling, the wrestler has the advantage. If you take a really good wrestler, really good jiu-jitsu, but the rule set is submission, the wrestler is going to have a hard time because the jiu-jitsu person has more submission advantages. That would be why they're compared, is because they do go hand in hand. I will say that wrestling is a little more niche because the rule set is pin them, whereas jiu-jitsu's got a little more flexibility. But because of that, it's going to take a little bit longer to learn all the nuances and details because there is a wider range of things you can do. But really, doing one or the other is going to benefit both. And it really just kind of depends on the person and which one you prefer. That's mainly the big difference, but that's also why they're compared so heavily. They're both good, solid ground technique martial arts.
To finish off with kind of the history and talk of some of the styles of martial arts, when did martial arts start?
Oh, that was one of our questions.
Yeah. One of our questions: when did martial arts start? And this is another one we can't give you an exact answer for, but let's see. I've got a Google search up here. The first thing I see is martial arts have been practiced since at least 2000 BC.
Yeah, be specific on that.
Again, I was talking to Deb about this last night, and she made the joke, that since Cain killed Abel, martial arts, that it's been since the beginning of time, since, caveman, since, first humans, whenever you want to go back to the beginning of humanity, people were fighting each other, which, questionable, but it just became more organized over time and more, what was the word I was looking for? Respected. It became just, being savage and fighting to, okay, this is actually for, self-defense or competition. Like there was some pride in what we did.
So I think the better question would be, because if you break it down, martial art. So I think the question is, when did the art get added in martial? Because like you said, martial's been around forever. That's essentially fighting. That's been around since two people decided to fight. It's when did the art come into play? When did this start becoming something that was an art? And that is actually harder to pinpoint. A lot of it goes back to, Japan or maybe China, things like that. But when they started probably adding in rule sets, when they started doing it for entertainment, you could argue that back to like gladiatorial combat when they would do entertainment battles and things. That was an art form because it was for entertainment. So when was the art added in? But then if you go a little step further, the term martial arts really actually didn't start coming around, especially in America, until like the 60s. 60s, and it's not that old.
And you can trace a lot of modern martial arts. And I've done, I'll say a little, I know a little bit about this from like the grappling side, is in the 19th century, like that's when modern day Jiu-Jitsu and Judo kind of started becoming what it is. Mm-hmm. Like I know, because I had to know it for my yellow belt test, Judo was founded in 1882. And I know a lot of Jiu-Jitsu, like you can trace the common origins of that to the 19th century. First mm-hmm. in Japan, then of course Brazil, then around the world. So like I know that is probably, and it's similar thing with some of the modern day karate, Taekwondo we know. I'd actually say even that might be a little bit more recent. So martial arts as we know it, probably within the last 200 years has it become what we see it as. But since mm-hmm. people, I would say wrestling was probably one of the first styles. Again, a very mm-hmm. different wrestling from what we know now.
Yeah.
But like 4,000 years ago, you had people, wrestling, trying to pin each other down for some level of competition.
Right. They wouldn't even do some form of like boxing, mm-hmm. Back in the 1500s, 1600s, BCs.
I would guess, yeah, wrestling and boxing are probably what we would describe kind of the early styles, but again, a very different version of those.
Right. But the actual term martial art is actually, grand scheme of things, relatively new. It's not that old of a term. I mean, karate predates the term martial arts, probably, if you think about it.
Oh yeah.
No, so,
and that's things like karate and kung fu. You can trace their origins very early on. Like they do go a lot farther back. And they branched off so many times. That's why I think a lot of times with martial arts, we think of them as a very Eastern thing, or we think about countries like China and Japan because they were very built into their cultures and some of the lore and mystification we have of the mythology mm-hmm. of that culture ties in with some of these styles. But again, I think if a lot of people are also familiar with like the Greeks, like that's where the Olympics started. So you see a lot of the early combat with that. So you see it in different areas. I would guess that a lot of martial arts was rooted in like the Middle East or Africa in its early beginnings, because that's where a lot of civilization was rooted from. And then as you had people travel to Asia, that's where that influence, as people conquered Europe, you saw it get fused in there with the Greeks and the Romans.
And I think that especially here in the States, what has made martial arts popular is the entertainment factor. I mean, when Bruce Lee came over and started doing movies, and you would see that. Now we have UFC, boxing matches, and the entertainment factor is really what makes martial arts, why it's well known, and why that term kind of came around a little bit. But the art of fighting someone martially has been around forever.
Very okay. I like some of those questions. Those were fun to talk about, all the styles and the history of martial arts, because it is something that there is a lot of mystery surrounding, and we don't really know all the things too. We're not scholars in that topic, but it is fun to talk about. Here's one that gets a little more personal to our school, and this comes from one of our fellow black belts who is an instructor at his own school out in North Carolina. Luke asks, what was the reason that prompted various changes in testing cycles? From 4-month cycles, 3 months, 1 month, different cycles for different groups, etc.
And his next question also relates directly to this as well.
We did an episode on a lot of our testing, so if you do want to know more about this, you can go listen to that episode. But I want to really focus on the cycle part of this question and why we changed the way we do our testing cycles.
So when I originally was going through, they were doing testings every couple months. And The idea of doing the testing every couple months was that we do it every 2 months and you test when you're ready. What happens, though, is when a student knows that there's a testing every couple months, it almost becomes an expectation that they'll test every time. That pumps them through way too fast. And so then we start bumping it back to 3 months to give them a little more time to train, and then 4 months.
I think 3 is what we started as when we opened, and what Luke and I, when we were going up through the ranks, that was what we were used to.
Right. So that'd be 4 testings a year. Then we even bumped it further to 3 testings a year, every 4 months. Honestly, that wasn't too bad. That gave people a fair amount of time to build into their skills a little bit. But even then, martial arts is so individualized that it's hard to say that everyone's going to be ready in a 4-month time. But what we did do was keep that as our cycles. So basically, we have 3 cycles we go through a year that we focus on a different general concept. Close combat, distance combat, angular combat.
And one more thing you kind of overlooked a little bit is when we were doing it more frequently, and even when we did it just 3 times a year, it used to be you tested for every rank. But at some point, I forget exactly when it was, we changed that to you only test to move up to the next rank level. So like we break our rank levels into basics, intermediate, advanced, black belt candidate, and then black belts. So you test between each level, but the ranks you earn in between, you just get at like the belt ceremony. So originally you would get it at the belt ceremony we did every 4 months. And then that even became you just get it at the end of class whenever you're ready. So there was a difference between testing for the next level and testing for every rank.
Right. And I think because they asked what was the reason and prompted the change. And I think the main reason that prompted this was to make sure the students were prepared appropriately and that we were awarding ranks, and everyone's on their own journey, but we were awarding ranks based a little more on skill than just time.
And I think it allows us as instructors and students to make the tests we do a bigger deal.
Yes.
Because when they're a little less infrequent, it means we can put more training and practice in before then. Because if for every rank you expect a student to put in the same amount of time in practice, I mean, truthfully, you'd probably have more people quit or burn out. Because it is a lot of pressure, and I don't think it's necessary for learning and growing. But I think having those bigger benchmarks is helpful.
Well, and another reason is, like you said, having those tests not happen as frequently does make them a bigger deal. It allows us to get a little more one-on-one time with the student. We usually recommend private lessons before someone gets ready for a test. It's just like you would study for something at school. You want to make sure you're doing your homework, or if you need extra tutoring, that's kind of what that is. But it helps us kind of see each student, qualify each student, help each student out. That way, they don't set themselves up for failure. We kind of want to see where they're at before they go for it. But it makes that a lot more manageable and a lot more meaningful.
And I'll even air like a small, I guess you could say, frustration we sometimes get, or I get when I hear it, is the like, oh, why do we have to test? Or, why do we have to do private lessons? Or, why is there a testing fee? And answer that one, why is there a testing fee, is because, it is our time. We are taking time out of our day for focusing on one student. When we have over 200 students we work with, I would love to take time out of my day for each one of them. I just don't have that time. You don't have that time. We're too busy. But when we do testings, it allows us, like you said, get that one-on-one time. I want anyone listening who's only really been at our school, so some of our students who are listeners, to know most schools don't do it this way. They test at every rank. And there is a testing fee at every level. So again,
and it's
don't air your frustration at us about that. Because if you look at other schools, they do it more. We're trying our best to give you guys the most personal and one-on-one training. And we do testings because it is a way to make sure you know what we've been teaching, just like in school. We do these tests to check and benchmark you for the next level.
Right, which I think what you just said actually goes into his second question here, which is...
Let's see.
What is looked at when deciding if a student is ready to test/pass a belt test? Is it based more on individual student growth or based on a preset standard that the student of that belt level needs to reach, or is it a mix of both? The simple answer is it is a mix of both. Every student is on their own journey, and every student is a little different, age, size, da-da-da-da-da. But there is also a set standard that we need to see to make sure they're prepared for that next level. And that's really what it is because like you said, we go from basic to intermediate. This is intermediate to advanced, and those are a new class of new material. And we want to make sure they're prepared. I don't want a student to go in there not really ready for what they're about to learn, because then it's going to feel like they're setting up for failure.
And I'll say this is something we've had a lot of discussions about recently over the last couple of years of, when is a student ready and what constitutes passing a test. As we've developed our testing system, we've talked about this, because there are students who, like, let's take 2 blue belts, for example. I don't have 2 specific ones in mind, but a really talented blue belt and a less talented blue belt.
Okay, I just got 2 in mind.
Well, good for you. but let's say that talented blue belt was always talented, and that struggling blue belt used to struggle even more. Well, they both have probably grown the same amount from where they started, but one is still clearly better than the other. And a lot of that comes into age, possibly learning disabilities, or other learning challenges, and etc. And we've had talks of, okay, does it benefit the student to pass? And one thing I brought up just the other day is we have students who are at the level where they can start sparring class, but they're not ready. They're not, and it's not their skills not ready, but they are not mentally ready as a young kid. They need more time to grow into their body and learn how to use their body. Some kids really do struggle with that for a while. And when you put on gear and start hitting people, it's not just that they can get hurt, but it can be very overwhelming because it does take a lot of brain and body coordination.
Right. It's just like any sport. Not everyone is going to be, if you're really, really tall and slender and can jump, you're probably going to find basketball a very easy sport to go into. Whereas if you're shorter and stocky, that might not be, not that you can't do it with practice, but it just is harder. The way I look at a testing, now, though, this is something that I don't say to the students. I'll say it here, and I'm not going to say specific names. But if you look at it like a school, you have grades, A, B, C, D, F. Obviously, F is fail, you didn't pass. When a student goes through a class, and then they go up to from, 5th to 6th grade, 6th to 7th, 1st, 2nd, blah, 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 whatever it is, 9th to 10th grade, they graduate and they pass to that next grade, but did they pass with a straight A or did they pass with a D? Both are passing grades. They both are passing grades, but one student is an A student and one student is a D. Does that mean that only A students can rank up? No. A D student might rank up. They just barely ranked up, but they still did. I don't usually say that to a student and correlate it that way, because when we do a test, it is also a plan for improvement and what they need. But when you see, like you said, 2 blue belts, one might be the A and one might be a C. They're both blue belts. They both have passed, but it's a different grade level. And I think that's just the easiest way to kind of put it in someone's head is not every student is an A student. Mm-hmm. You have A students, most students are B or C, and then you have a few Ds.
Yeah.
But they have to at least get there.
I think if you look at a new intermediate student, that's where it's the most evident. Someone who just passed their basic test to orange belt, is there's going to be a wide difference between I guess you could say, your top and your struggling students at that level. Doesn't mean they both didn't pass their test and they're both ready for the next level, but that's one of the things that makes teaching an intermediate class challenging. And I'm curious if it's like this for other instructors too at different schools, is
sure
the wide variation between skill level. And there are times, we have basic students who they are not ready. It's not like just anyone can pass. There are some certain things you have to be able to do. And if you can't do these things to the level required of you, you will not pass your test. Usually we don't let you try the test. We very rarely let someone pass a test if we know they're going to fail.
Yeah, that's another reason we do.
Attempt the test. Whatever.
Yeah, right. But we do the private lessons so we can say, okay, you are good to go. Do this and you'll be fine. Because I don't want to be like, hey, you're not ready. Well, if they just want to do it anyway, I'm not going to necessarily stop them, but that's hard.
We're running out of time, so I've got 2 last questions. Let's see if we can speed run these real quick.
Perfect.
I'll let you answer this one. Are there any drills or ways to practice BJJ at home without a rolling partner?
Oh, man, I get this a lot. So there are different motions and things you can do at home. You could even YouTube some of those drills, but a lot of them are also good exercises. What we call dying cockroaches. So essentially curling up in a ball and rotating your hips and moving without letting your arms, hands, or feet touch the ground. That's a great drill to build up that core strength and so you can move on the ground. You could also do a lot of what they call sit-out drills where you post up on a hand, kick a leg through. That way you can learn your base and your post. Getting up from base, 2 hands on the ground, getting your feet wide is always a great drill to practice so you can practice standing up. So there are, and most of them are going to help you with a lot of core concepts for Jiu-Jitsu that are going to make these specific techniques easier. But I would just YouTube some of them.
Like one of my favorites to practice without a partner is we call it a shoulder get up. I don't know if that's the technical term, but I've heard you call it before.
Yes.
And I really like doing that one, and I've even shown students that without a partner, it's so useful in different contexts. I would just be able to be explosive by moving onto one shoulder like that.
Right, and then getting your hips up without having to have your knees touch the ground, just your feet. Yep.
That and shrimping, kind of related.
Shrimping is a good one.
I do a lot.
Can't believe I missed that.
Well, there's some good drills, and like you said, you can YouTube those. So our last question here: can any age people really get a black belt?
Oh man, see, that's a loaded question. So I'm gonna say no, and that is simply because at our school, we have an age restriction of at least 16 to get a black belt. Now, with that being said, that is not every school. Some schools will give out black belts at much younger. But I think the question was intended for someone older. So I wanted to get that out of the way. Because it is a personal, individual journey, yes, I think anyone can get a black belt because that is your black belt. It's not, if you're 60, that is as a 60-year-old's black belt, not a 16-year-old's black belt. But I'm never going to tell someone that they absolutely cannot. It might be harder, there might be struggles, there might be things we have to modify, but I think you said earlier, it's the growth and the potential shown in there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, and if you even look at the students who tested with us, that you've got to be between ages 16 and maybe 30 to get your black belt, because that's where a lot of our black belt students, when they tested, some maybe in their early 30s, but we have had a few who were, older.
Greg.
Even recently we've had, well, I'll have to ask Deb how old she was when she got her black belt.
Well, I'm saying her current age, but
yeah, her current age. I know she started at 36 though, so you can think that we have someone who started at 36. She earned her black belt, still trains now at 68, and then I know 2 weeks ago we talked all about what it looks like to train as an adult. So if you are wondering, can any age people really get a black belt? I would go listen to that, because if any age people can train in martial arts, I don't see any reason why any age can't get a black belt. If that training is consistent, then just like anyone else, after, for us, 6 to 7 years, you'll be in that ballpark.
Right. And I think that the biggest reason that comes up is there's this notion that this is only for young people. And I think that actually martial arts is unique in that it is for a wide range of age, and it is something that everyone can do as a group. Yes, you're not going to go out and fight in the ring, after probably 50, unless you were doing it at age 20. And even then, there's that prime time. But that is a very specific niche of competitors. And most of those people still keep up with martial arts to some degree. You can't tell me that Mike Tyson doesn't still keep up with a good physical fitness routine in boxing. He does. He absolutely does. And has for a long time. He didn't just give it up entirely when he kind of got past his prime. That doesn't happen.
I think part of this that we may have talked about before, if not, we probably should at some point, is the idea that people think this black belt is like such a great thing, and it's an accomplishment for sure. Black belts are very talented, but there's a lot of black belts out there. It is not, some super secret unique club. And when I look at Kevin and I, like, outside of here, we're just two people. Like, if we can be black belts, anyone can be. We just put in training. We put in practice. Mm-hmm. And yes, we're very talented. But we've kept up. We've kept up with our training. But, any person really can get a black belt with practice.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yes, we have restrictions on age for maturity, but once you hit that, it's that and beyond. I always joke about how we'll train students 4 to 104. So if you're 105, sorry about you.
Yeah. Well, excellent. I really appreciate all those questions. Those were a lot of fun to talk about. And I think for we had like 11 questions. We got through those in just under an hour. So that was pretty good.
Pretty impressive.
So thank you all. If you have any more questions, let us know. We will be back, or at least the plan is to be back for a third season. We'll see how the rest of this year goes as we finish up some projects. We got some big things coming up soon. But thank you all. Please share this episode and any others with friends, family, anyone you think could be interested. Leave a like, comment, anything you will have to say, Kevin.
Oh, I appreciate it. Keep the questions coming. If y'all have any more, keep posting them, and we would love to answer them either in the comments or maybe even future down the road do another Q&A episode. This was fun.
Thank you all. For now, keep kicking
for a living.